Welcome to MTG Friends. I'm Ryan, and we are doing essential white cards for Commander EDH. We're talking about auto-includes for your deck builds, serious considerations, and a third type of card we're going to discuss are situational cards that you're going to want to include in certain kind of builds, certain kind of decks you put together. So, before we get started, in the description is a link for the other colors of the color wheel. We're doing all of the colors for essential cards for Commander EDH. We're doing white now, so let's get started. And first up is gonna be Ramp. And in Ramp, we got Smothering Tithe, an absolute auto-include in white builds. It's a 4-drop enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sack, treasure artifact token, and you get 1 mana of any color. So this is all about making your opponents have to think about their mana management as well as just a great drawing mechanic for you. It's a great card. Definitely include this in a white build you're doing. Next up is Land Tax. I'm not going to say it's an auto-include, but it's certainly something to consider. It's a 1-drop enchantment. During your upkeep, if an opponent controls more land than you may search your library and remove up to 3 basic land cards and put them into your hand. Reshuffle your library afterwards. So if you're playing against 3 other people, there's a good chance that somebody's going to have more lands than you. This comes into effect, and then you just benefit from it incredibly. Now, keep in mind, run enough basic lands in your build so that this card is effective. Otherwise, it's not going to work for you, and you probably just shouldn't include it. So, something to definitely consider in the ramp category. Speaking of ramp, this is an incredible ramping card for certain kind of decks, and it is a land. It's Sarah's Sanctum, a legendary land. Tap, add white to your mana pool for each enchantment you control. So, it's very specific for enchantment heavy decks, so that's why you got to decide, okay, does this card make sense? But if it does, and you do run a lot of enchantments in the build you're making, by all means put this thing in there. I mean, it's no Gaia's Cradle for green, but oh man, it's right out of the same set block, and it is absolutely off the chain great. Sarah's Sanctum. All right, let's move right along into removal. Now, in removal, we have just an absolute staple old school card, Wrath of God. It is a 4-drop destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. It's at sorcery speed, and this just helps wipe the board for anything that's not indestructible. It is a powerful, powerful Wrath card. There are other Wrath cards that came after this one, you know, maybe a couple like these that might make sense for a particular build you're making, but this one is an oldie but goodie and is really great and really powerful, really potent. So run Wrath of God and you won't be sorry. Swords to Plowshares, another serious staple in white. It is a 1-drop instant exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Boy, if you need to remove something that's sticky on the board, this is the way to do it. It is very close to being an auto-include, but again, based off of the kind of deck you're doing, this may or may not make complete and utter sense for you, but more than likely, you're going to have a place in your 99 for this card. And much like Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, also a 1-drop instant, exile target creature as well, except for this one, you let them go fetch a basic land instead. So early on, it might hurt you just slightly because you're going to let your opponent ramp, but you'll be able to get rid of something that otherwise might be a situation for you. But this certainly doesn't have much of a downside mid-game or late game. It just gets rid of a creature that is tough to get out of here. And what's even nicer is because it's exile, it's not going to hit their graveyard where you can reanimate it. Well, where they can reanimate it. All right, next up is Rest in Peace. Also a situational card. It's a 2-drop enchantment. When Rest in Peace enters the battlefield, exile all cards from all graveyards. This is a serious hate piece for all those other opponents that are doing a lot of stuff out of their graveyard. Oh, say, I don't know, black. And by the way, go check out the black episode for black cards for Commander EDH at the following episode. Okay. If a card or token would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So you can cut down on your opponent's abilities and mechanics by having this in play, and it's just going to cause them problems. Now, of course, you're not going to want to run this if you are also like token heavy and you want to be doing things out of the graveyard. So that's why I say definitely not an auto include, because it just depends on the kind of build you're doing. Now, if you are running mono white, this is a definite include. It's Return to Dust. It's a 4-drop instant. Exile target artifact or enchantment. If you cast a spell during your main phase, you may exile up to one other target artifact or enchantment. And the reason I say that this is a definite auto include in white mono is because if you're running it with, say, green as well, this doesn't become as powerful because there's lots of removal spells in green that target artifacts and enchantments, for example. But if you're in mono white, not to beat this horse to death, definitely run Return to Dust. Now, next up is Darksteel Mutation. This is an absolute auto include in white builds, because it's so versatile and so powerful. It's enchant creature. Enchanted creature is an insect artifact creature with base power and toughness 0/1 and has indestructible, and that's key to this card. And it loses all other abilities, card types, and creature types. So the reason this is so great in Commander is because you can put Darksteel Mutation onto your opponent's commander, and then that commander becomes a 0/1 indestructible, so nothing's wiping this off the board except for an exile spell. So this is really great, really powerful, and is a huge help as a utility card in your deck. So definitely run Darksteel Mutation if you got a spot for it. Next up is Aura of Silence. It does kind of double duty. It is a 3-drop enchantment. Artifact and enchantment spells your opponent's cost 2 extra to cast. Yes, sir. And then on top of that, you can sack it and destroy target artifact or enchantment. So you can use it for its removal mechanics, or you can actually just keep it on the board and cause your opponents to have more grief with their mana base. Next up is Austere Command. It is one of the most powerful removal spells in white because of how versatile it is. Now, yes, it is a 6-drop, which is unfortunate. However, it does have some versatility, like I was saying. It's choose to destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 4 or greater. That is excellent versatility and is a very, very good staple in white decks. Now, another great removal spell, just like the Wrath of God with a different twist to it, is Terminus. It is a 6-drop. Put all creatures on the bottom of their owner's library. Oh, but wait, it has Miracle for 1 white. You may cast this card for its Miracle cost when you draw it as the first card of that turn. Such a great card. At most, it's going to cost you 6. At the very least, it's going to cost you 1. So that is a great removal spell. And especially if you want to keep things out of people's graveyard, it just shoves them back into the bottom of their library. And then you don't have to worry about what was on the board. All right, now we are entering Protection. And at the top of this is, of course, Teferi's Protection. This thing is broken beyond belief. It is fantastic. Absolute auto include in white. It is instant speed 3-drop until your next turn. Your life total can't change and you gain protection from everything. Everything? Yes, everything. All permanents you control phase out, and then you exile Teferi's Protection. Now, phase out, in case you're not familiar with this, means all your permanents don't exist until your next turn. So that is the ultimate protection. Holy shnikes, this thing is fabulous, fantastic, fantissimo. Put this in your white deck. And if you're running dual colors, still put this in your deck. It is an absolute staple. Grand Abolisher for 2 in white. Human Cleric. This is a nice little hate piece for your opponents. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities or of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. Now this is fantastic, especially against blue deck players, because hey, guess what? While it's your turn, they're doing nothing. They can't do nothing when Grand Abolisher is out there. Just great, especially for removal in black, control for blue, etc., etc., etc. Definite consideration. I wouldn't go as far as say it's an auto include, but certainly a consideration. I run this in a lot of white builds. Next up is a great new one from Commander 2020. It is Flawless Maneuver with that cool little new Commander edition, where for 3, it's an instant. If you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. And if you've watched any of our other episodes, you know how much I love playing spells that cost you nothing. Nothing spells, 2 thumbs up. 2 thumbs up, y'all. All right, this one is definitely a situational card. It's Mother of Runes for 1. This is for white weenie decks, for those kinds of going wide, keeping things protected, going fast, going hard. It's tap, target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. So you certainly would want to consider running this, like I said, in white weenie decks, in just those fast, synergized builds. Otherwise, you might want to leave it out. All right, new to the block as well is the modal cards out of Zendikar Rising. This is a great one. It's got a land on the other side, and it's create 2 4/4 white angel warrior creature tokens with flying, and non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until your next turn. Now, it does have a pretty hefty mana cost, you know, but it's also a land, so you can use it for either. And what's really nice about this is it's going to make everything else indestructible, and that's amazing. But ironically, if you're running an angel tribal deck, you might not actually want to run this. It's kind of a judgment call because it won't make your other angels indestructible. So just something to consider, something to ponder. All right, Angel's Grace. It's a 1-drop. Very, very cool card. It's got Split Second, which we'll get to in a second, which is why we're putting this in an essentials list. You can't lose the game this turn, and your opponents can't win the game this turn until end of turn. Damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. So this is a, things are going really bad. We got to shut this down and buy myself another turn. But more importantly is Split Second, which means when you finally put this on the stack, everything else stops. Nothing else can be played until that spell resolves. So if your opponents are playing a combo and it's firing off, this is how you shut that down. Shut it down, reset. So that's why we have this as a consideration for you, because it's white's iteration of shutting that down with Split Second. All of the other colors do have Split Second cards that can also shut down combos. It's very, very cool. A very powerful ability on a card. Now let's enter Control. Control in white? Why yes, Control. We're not talking about blue. We're talking about white. All right, Ghostly Prison. It's 3-drop enchantment. Creatures can't attack you unless controllers pays 2 for each creature he or she controls that's attacking you. So if your opponent's going wide, this is how you deal with that. It's very great. Again, it makes them have to think about their mana management, slows the game down, lets you put your pieces in play, and white loves to do that, to get things sorted out and get things how you want them. All right, Silence. It's a 1-drop. This one is a definite include for any CEDH competitive commander play, and a consideration depending on your build. It's an instant. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn. So you need to shut stuff down. Boom. Shutting it down with Silence. Very cool, very powerful card when you need it. Now, this next one is a serious hate piece. It's Dranith Magistrate for 2. It's a new one out of Ikoria. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. So this shuts down graveyard play, and more importantly, this shuts down your opponents playing their commander. That's right, because the command zone is not your hand. And this, as long as it's on the battlefield, keeps your opponents from casting their commanders. Hee hee. Oh man, if I could do the Bart Simpson voice, I'd be doing it right now. That is just bananas awesome. And maybe a card you hadn't even thought of that would be great in your build. Aven Mind Sensor for 3. Speaking of shutting things down, it's got flash, it's a flyer, 2/1. If an opponent would search a library, that player searches the top 4 cards of that library instead. So that opponent's searching for a combo piece or something they need that's situational. You flash this thing in and you shut it down. Now they can only look at 4 cards, and that is great. And you're hoping, hey, that might be 4 lands. Woohoo! Sorry, buddy, ain't happening. And then it just stays on the battlefield until they figure out how to remove it. And nobody's tutoring until then. Well, at least them. You can keep tutoring because this only affects your opponents. All right, next up, Ethersworn Canonist. It's a 2-drop human cleric. Each player who has cast a non-artifact spell this turn can't cast additional non-artifact spells. It's a 2/2. So situational depending on your kind of build. So if you are artifact heavy, this thing makes perfect sense. Or if you just want to slow things down and shut down your opponents, playing their spells, this is how you do it. Oh man. And it's just, like I said, it's specific to non-artifact spells. Archon of Emeria, 3-drop. Archon, new kid on the block from Zendikar Rising. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. So that's got to benefit you too. So that's why you got to make sure you run this in the right kind of build. And non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. And as we all know, in Commander, people are running non-basics all over the place. This slows them down significantly. Speaking of slowing them down, Authority of the Consuls for 1 enchantment. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Oh boy, sorry those hasty creatures. Nope, you're coming in tapped, at least when Authority of the Consuls is in. And then an added bonus whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. So a definite auto included for any life gain decks, and a consideration for sure for anything that you want to be slowing down the game to a pace that you like. All right, Linvala, Keeper of Silence. I love the fact that this is a 4-drop. It's a 3/4 flyer, which is great stats, just that alone. And activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. Put this in your mono white decks for sure, and maybe even your dual or multiple color decks as well. This is just a nice little bonus because there's likely going to be creatures on the board that are going to have activated abilities, and this does not affect yours. Now this next one I just felt is more of an honorable mention than, hey, essential card, but it's Deafening Silence. It's for 1 enchantment. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-creature spell each turn. This shuts things down, especially in competitive EDH. And if you're playing casual or semi-casual, this thing is a serious consideration, especially if you tend to play against groups that like to combo off things, like to do multiple spells. This just shuts it down. And of course, if you're putting in your deck, you want it to not be affecting you as much. So this would be a creature-heavy build. Yes, indeed. All right. Now, next up is Draw. Draw in white? Yes, Draw in white. There's not a ton of it in white, but here's a few. Enlightened Tutor. It's a fantastic tutor for 1. It's search your library for a card, put it at the top of it, and that's it. And it only costs you 1. And that is fantastic. Oh, and it's for an artifact or enchantment. I probably should have mentioned that. So you go fetch what you need in terms of an enchantment or an artifact, and if for budgetary reasons, you need to put in something else because this is just a little steep for you. You can always drop an Idyllic Tutor in there, which costs you 3 instead of 1, and actually benefits you by putting it into your hand instead. And that's the same thing where you can go fetch an enchantment card and put it in your hand. Now notice the big difference between the two is Enlightened Tutor lets you go get an artifact as well. Idyllic Tutor only lets you go fetch an enchantment. So for those enchantment heavy decks or combo pieces or or hate pieces you got in there, Idyllic Tutor will do the job. I tend to run both in my white builds as long as I have the room for Idyllic Tutor as well. Now let's talk about a tutor in the form of a body, and that is Academy Rector. It is when Academy Rector is put into a graveyard from play, you may remove Academy Rector from the game. If you do, search your library for an enchantment card and put that card into play. Then shuffle your library. So again, depending on your deck, this is going to be an auto-include, and the reason it would be an auto-include is if you're running enchantments, or there's certain combo pieces that require an enchantment that you need to go fetch and put in place. So this is a great card for those kinds of situations. Now let's talk about Graveyard. Talk about Graveyard in black? Why yes, let's do that. Emeria the Sky Ruin. You're going to want to run this in mono white for sure. And that is Emeria the Sky Ruin enters the battlefield tapped. It's a land, of course. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control seven or more planes, which is why I'm saying mono white, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then you can always tap it for 1 white. Now that is incredibly powerful to be fetching things out of your graveyard. And it really should be mono white or a splash of another color as well. And that's when Emeria the Sky Ruin makes absolutely perfect sense for your build. All right, Sevin's Reclamation for 3. It's a sorcery. Return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. I love it when it goes back to the battlefield and it's not a black spell. That's just so fun and janky. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, you may copy this spell and may choose a new target for the copy. And it's got flashback, which just makes this a great card that you can use multiple times. So fantastic. Flagstones of Trakir. It is tapped for white, but wait. When Flagstones of Trakir is put into a graveyard from play, you may search your library for a plains card and put it into play tapped. If you do, shuffle your library. So this is a great synergized card with, say, Crucible of Worlds or a couple other cards that let you fetch it back. And if it gets destroyed, you put a plains on there. It makes the most sense if you're going to be fetching it again. But it also has some protection. So if there's land destruction, this thing is just great, and it does not come in tapped, which makes this just a fantastic card. Now, brought back synergizes with these kinds of cards because it's a 2-drop instant. Choose up to 2 target permanents. Notice it says permanents, which means it can also be a land. Cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn, return them to the battlefield tapped. So let's say you have a fetch land, or you have a flagstones, or you have any other kind of card. This thing is going to go grab it and put it back onto the battlefield. It is a fantastic card. And I just wanted to mention that it also targets lands, which can be enormously helpful in the early and mid game, especially for the kind of build you might have. All right, and this one's sort of an honorable mention and is very specific and niche. It's Auriok Salvagers. It is a 4-drop 2/4 human soldier with pay 2, return target artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So it's artifact specific, and so if that's something you're building, especially you have a lot of artifacts that are 0 cost, 1 cost, and you got a lot of shenanigans going on with that, this Auriok Salvager is going to be a perfect include for your deck. All right, now we're going to enter the everything else category, which is just cards I felt that should be highlighted but don't fall into those specific categories. And that is Brimaz, King of Oreskes. It's a 3-drop legendary creature cat soldier with vigilance. Whenever that King of Oreskes attacks, put a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance onto the battlefield attacking. And when Brimaz blocks a creature, put a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance onto the battlefield blocking that creature. So you got token generation and a lot of token stuff going on. This thing is going to be great, going to be perfect. And if you got life gain and you got cats and you got all this shenanigans going on, you might want to consider putting this thing in. All right, moving on. Divine Visitation for 5. It's an enchantment. If one or more creature tokens would be created under your control, that many 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance are created instead. So, like I said, if you're creating tokens and you got this thing out, you're going to be creating 4/4 bodies instead that fly. Oh man, with vigilance. So yeah, put Brimez in there and Divine Visitation. Woo! Yeah, you got some serious hot cooking going on there. Hot cooking? What? I don't know. I'm not editing that out. All right. Okay, next up is Avacyn, Angel of Hope. It is a spendy card, but a consideration, just depending on what kind of build you're doing, especially if you're doing an Angel Tribal. It's a 5 white, legendary creature Angel, flying, vigilance, indestructible. Oh, indestructible. Other permanents you control have indestructible. I notice it says permanents. That includes lands. That includes artifact. That includes enchantments. So definitely, if you got some ramp that you can do, put this bad boy in. It is fantastic. Elish Norn Grand Cenobite. I'm really actually putting this in the list because I just have a special place in my heart for it because it's so janky and so fun. And the artwork is phenomenal. This just makes me go, oh, what is going on there? It's so cool looking. Hats off to the artist who did this. All right, I digress. I promise I digress. It is a 7-drop 4/7 Praetor with vigilance. Other creatures you control get +2/+2, and creatures your opponents control get -2/-2. So you drop this thing on the board, and it is a serious swing in your favor because their whole board shrinks. Your whole board gets a bunch bigger. Oh, +2 bigger, and it is just a fun card to play. All right, and finally in that particular category is Felidar Retreat. This thing is a new one at a Zendikar Rising. It is a 4-drop enchantment landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token or put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. These creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. So this has got some really cool stuff going on. It's reason why I wanted to mention it if you weren't super familiar with it. Not only does it create tokens for you, but then you can start buffing all your creatures. So if you're running tokens or +1/+1 counter action or both, definitely put this in. Or if you're running landfall or all three of those, this thing just goes bananas real quick. So definitely consider putting that into your 99. All right, so I have kind of an interesting follow-up to all the main categories to kind of end this segment, which is life gain win cons. So white has a few really cool alt win cons, and these are some of them highlighted. There's also an episode that we do for my Alluro Commander deck that has a few more alt win conditions for life gain decks. Check it out. I'll put it in the description below. So life gain win cons. Felidar Sovereign. It's a 6-drop vigilance lifelinker. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. I mean, really? I mean, you start with 40. And if you're in a life gain deck, there you go. So this thing just has to survive one turn. And then, booyah, game over. Alt win. Angel of Destiny. It's a 5-drop flying double striker. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each gain that much life. At the beginning of your end step, if you have at least 15 more life than your starting life total, each player Angel of Destiny attacked this turn loses the game. So this doesn't do what Felidar Sovereign does because it picks off one opponent at a time, but it's the same kind of concept where you have life gain and then you win because of it. Very cool, very interesting card. Last on the list for essential white cards for Commander EDH is a nice little combo piece that maybe you're not familiar with, and that's Heliod Suncrowned comboing up with Walking Ballista. And here's how it works. You have both on the battlefield and 2 mana available to you. And let me explain. Whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control, and then you have the 2, which you spend. Another target creature gains lifelink until end of turn. So you target that to Ballista, and then you remove a 1/1 counter from Ballista, and you hit your opponent, which then triggers Suncrown to give your Ballista a 1/1 counter, which means that Ballista goes infinite as long as your opponents can't intercede somehow or counter the ability, and then you just go infinite and you keep pinging them for 1 until they're dead, dead, dead. And scoop and play your next game. Super fun little combo. And Heliod Sun Crown is powerful enough to just put it in as well. But if you're going to be running Heliod Sun Crown, please put in Ballista, because that's just a super fun way to win and a super fun janky combo piece. All right, thanks for tuning in. Make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe if you're new, and hit those alerts if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our content. We're uploading frequently, and thanks for tuning in until the end. I'm going to give you a special little merit badge as long as you put something down in the comments and let me know, hey, I made it to the end. Yes, that combo is awesome. It really is. Yep, I'll notice it and I'll respond, I promise. All right, thanks for tuning in and being a friend of the gathering. Check out our other episodes.